Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shannon Derejo from Creamer Media. Welcome to today's webinar, where we will discuss the role of renewable energy in assisting South Africa to overcome load shedding. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Energy and Water Sector Education and Training Authority, Enpower Trading, Balancel, BTE Renewables, Energy Innovation Holdings, NG, and Kluber Lubrication. We thank them for making this event possible. Before we begin, please be aware that we have enabled the Q&A function, so please post any questions into the Q&A box. You'll find this on the panel at the bottom of your screen. The facilitator will pick out themes in the questions and answer as many of them as possible throughout the discussion. To encourage interaction, we've also enabled the chat function, so you can network with the panelists via the chat box. You'll also find this at the bottom of your screen. Please don't post any questions in the chat box, though, as we may miss them. Post them into the Q&A. Please be aware that we are recording this webinar and we'll be sending the recording to you when it's available. We are also streaming the webinar live to YouTube, and we'll share the link in the chat shortly. Today's webinar is facilitated by Tumelo Chipfupa, partner at EY Cova. Previously, he was joint managing director at Cova Advisory and Associates, a boutique consulting firm specializing in government grants and incentives, energy efficiency, and global trade. He is committed to facilitating collaboration between business and government to improve human welfare, and he's passionate about sustainable development strategies. Tumelo will facilitate the discussion with our panel, which consists of Dr. Rethabile Melamu, CEO of the South African Photovoltaic Industry Association, James Beatty, CEO of Enpower Trading, Mpho Mookapele, CEO of the Energy and Water Sector Education and Training Authority, and Santosh Sookgrim, Senior Technical Advisor at the South African Wind Energy Association. He's replacing CEO Niveshan Govender, who was unavailable for the webinar. I'll hand over now to our facilitator, Tumelo Chipfupa, to take the proceedings forward. Over to you, Tumelo.
Thank you, Shannon, for the introduction, and welcome everybody to this. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to come in and participate. We hope that it's going to be a rewarding engagement for you. And on our part, we look forward to learning from your questions and learning from your contribution. Today's webinar, obviously, as Shannon has indicated, it's on the important topic of renewable energy and what it can do to help us with load shedding. I think it's generally accepted that load shedding has got a very huge impact on our lives. Firstly, it's just the nuisance. You cannot organize your life. You cannot organize your day. You lose control over what you are going to be doing during the day. And the second thing is that more than just being a nuisance, load shedding is quite costly. According to the Reserve Bank, in 2022, shedding cost the South African economy about 300 billion, equates to about 5% of GDP. And it also cost us some 600,000 jobs. Now, there are lots of debates as to what are the important actions that we need to take or undertake in order to end load shedding. But I think everyone is agreed that, whatever we need to do, renewables are a big part of the solutions for ending load shedding. The second reason why renewables are important to our future is that according to the modeling done by the Presidential Climate Commission and the CSIR, going into the future, if we want cheaper electricity, renewables provide what's called the least cost energy modeling. There's been a recent survey done by Eskom, and it showed that there's close to about 66,000 watts of renewable energy projects that are in the pipeline. And these have come about as a result of the government's renewable energy program and also the changing, regulatory landscape. This tells us that, South Africa has got the resources, at least the natural resources, to help us put renewables onto the energy grid. But in addition to that, we do know that there are some challenges that we have, and they are quite formidable challenges. Challenges that we have to do with grid access and grid capacity. I think in the recent round of renewables, we couldn't get enough projects going because of the capacity is not always available where the projects or the renewable energy resource is. Other problems that we have to do with policy, with regulation. For instance, in order to get energy trading going, we do need a framework, and we are still not yet there, as most probably we'll hear in this webinar. Other problems that we've got have to do with skills. Renewable energies at the scale at which we are beginning to deploy them require skills. They require skilled artisans. They require skilled engineers. And although we do have the artisans in some instances and we have the engineers, sometimes they do not have the necessary experience in the sector. So it's quite a challenge. And in order to get the sector working properly, we will require that we jack up our skills and we get our skills up to the level that is required. I have a very interesting panel today, quite a diverse panel focusing on different parts of the renewables value chain and the renewable sector. They are people who can talk and I guess who can make a substantial contribution as to, how do we go about in resolving some of the challenges that we have. And I'm going to now start asking the panel members to introduce themselves. And as they introduce themselves, I would like each one of them to touch on at least one aspect of the challenge that they see from their vantage point of the sector, and talk about, what are some of the things that we should be doing. I'll just, talk to how people appear on my screen. I'll start with you, Dr. Rethabile. If you could just maybe introduce yourself, tell us about what you do, and tell us what you think are some of the, pertinent challenges that with photovoltaics and what should we be doing about them. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ndade Tumelo. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, Ndade Tumelo. And let me also acknowledge Creamer Media for inviting Sabvia to this webinar. It's fantastic being here. My name is Rethabile Melamu, as has already been mentioned. I head the South African Photovoltaic Industry Association, Sabvia for short. We are a member-led organization, Mpho. We were established in 2010 and we represent interests of 679 actors along the solar PV value chain. So anyone from project developers all the way to SMMEs that operate in the residential space. Can talk a lot more about the challenges that we have in the future, but I'm going to pick one for now, moderator, which is access to the grid, especially in high resource areas such as the Northern Cape and the Western Cape. And that is really affecting the rate at which some of the projects that the developers and IPPs have worked on or developed to this stage to come on the grid and bring on much needed electrons. So it's a big challenge, and I know that panel members are going to talk about it in detail at a later stage. I'll sneak in another challenge that we have experienced, and it's around skills. And that's why it's so good to see EWCTA being part of this, because from the solar PV perspective, especially residential market segment, we have seen huge shortage of capable people. Not anyone who claims to be able to install solar PV are really skilled and capable people. I'll stop there for now, moderator, and I will chip in at a later stage. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Melamu. Interesting, you have identified the problems of skills and the problems of access to the grid. I'll ask then your counterpart in the wind space, Mr. Santosh Sookgrim, maybe if at all he could just maybe tell us a little bit about, what he does and about his organization. And maybe he can expand also on some of the problems that you've spoken about, or maybe talk about how they have an impact on the wind sector. Santosh, over to you.
Thank you, facilitator. And thank you, Dr. Melamu, for that introduction and that segue into what we're going to talk about. So I'm Santosh Sookgrim. I'm the Senior Technical Advisor at the South African Wind Energy Association. In the same way as SAFIA, we are a non-profit industry organization that represents the voice of the wind industry in South Africa. Our role here at SAFIA is to advocate for the growth and acceleration of the wind sector in South Africa. Currently, my task is to ensure that we ensure collaboration between the different members, that we bring the relative and the key stakeholders together to try and come up with solutions to the issues that we face in the sector now. We facilitate that through our working groups. We have 9 of them, as well as through data collection measures, through research papers, and through general knowledge management in the media. In terms of the challenges that Dr. Melamu identified, I think that's the biggest challenge across both wind and PV right now, which is grid and skills. We've seen that, and we'll talk about this a bit later, but when you look at the uptake of wind in South Africa, it's a very choppy road. It seems to be up and down depending on the bid window, the timeline between the different bid windows. And what we've seen now is, following the conclusion of bid window 6, which was, if we admit it a little bit, of a failure there to procure any wind projects, we've seen that now the private market is actually accelerating growth. And through something you mentioned earlier, facilitator, the Renewable Energy Grid Survey, we see that the appetite for the uptake of renewable energy, both for wind, PV, and hybrid solutions, including battery storage, is accelerating rapidly, and not just across the traditionally resource-rich areas of the country, but through other areas. And the main reason for that is the open capacity of grid in those areas. So I think that's a very, that's an optimistic view of where we're going. And we know that there's up to, I think it's 93 gigawatts from that survey of installed capacity, and 66 gigawatts of contracted capacity that's hopefully going to come online by 2028. So all in all, I think the future does look bright for renewable energy. Yes, there are challenges in terms of the immediate challenge for the grid as well as for skills. If we're going to accelerate this industry, both wind and PV, we need to bring in new people into the industry. And we also need to ensure that we upskill those people from other industries that from the traditional power generation industries that may lose out in that case. We need to bring those people, provide the skills that they need, and bring them into the sector in order to forge this new market segment going forward.
Santosh, okay, you've been quite optimistic about uptake in non-traditional areas, or in areas which have not been in the past seen as resource rich, and according to you, that's as a result of having open grid capacity in those areas. But again, the challenge that you identify, it's skills. Skills are something that Dr. About. And now maybe I'll hand over to you, James. I guess it all ties. You can talk to us about energy trading. What is it all about, and how is it going to help in resolving problems, and what are some of the challenges that can make energy trading take off in South Africa?
Thank you very much, Mr. Facilitator. And again, just to echo previous participants, thank you so much to Kramer Media for hosting us today. I think absolutely a great segue into the value proposition that trading brings. Before I discuss that, a quick intro on me. CEO of Enpower Trading. We're a recently licensed electricity trading business in South Africa. So we're able to buy and sell electricity from anyone to anyone within the borders of SA. You may be aware, our audience, that there's two types of networks. There's the Eskom network and there's the municipality network. If you're operating in a municipality, you need to have use of system agreements. So it's subject to use of system agreements. The reason why I'm saying that is I think it feeds through into the complications or the issues topic we're raising. Certainly from our side, in terms of challenges, it's a really new market. And so obviously one of the difficulties has basically been just templates in a new marketplace. What I mean by that, standard template for wheeling agreements, harmonized tariff structures. For us, it's been very challenging because, as mentioned, if you're trading inside a municipality, every single municipality in South Africa, we have to get a use of system agreement with those municipalities to distribute power downstream. And that has been a very big education journey. I think it dovetails well into what Dr. Rethabile and Santosh mentioned too, which is skills. Of course, just giving such an education process to these stakeholders in those networks. I think an enormous amount of work has been done. We've got two use of system agreements now, one with George Municipality, the other one with Overstrand, and also in a pilot as City of Cape Town, and we'll start wheeling and trading on the 1st of July. So I think, my biggest challenge has probably been education and proliferating and understanding of our business model and the use of systems. To answer also part of your question, I think, Mr. Facilitator, Tumelo, was, what is trading all about? What are we going to be doing in the marketplace? What is the value proposition to SA? Obviously, again, trading is as old as the hills. It's quite simple when you break it down. We are buying and selling. We buy and sell electricity. So we are buying from, typically our business model will be sourcing from clean renewable generators as Santosh mentioned, best resource located possible in South Africa, and wheeling or transporting that electricity to users all around the country, whether they be on the Eskom network or inside municipalities. So delivering that cleaner, more affordable power. Now, what does this do? It's creating liquidity in the marketplace. We're connecting more and more and more buyers to sellers, which are future assets that will be constructed power plants. So in the medium term, our hope is that this new model will create new power plants to be constructed and help alleviate load shedding and deliver cleaner, more affordable power to SA. Those are my opening comments. I'm sure there'll be more questions and debate alongside that. Thank you, Mr. Facilitator.
Thanks a lot, James. Quite educational. And now we move to Ms. Mookapele. Mpho, I guess everybody says that you've got the magic bullet. Everybody that have spoken before you have said it's skills. James has just spoken about how there's lack of skills within the municipalities to put in place the necessary templates and infrastructure and rules. Santosh has spoken about the growing market and the fact that skills are a constraint. Dr. Melamu spoke about, particularly in the residential sector, there is a constraint of skills. Maybe you, from the sector educational authority, educational and training authority, you can share with us, what are some of the things that you are doing in the SETA to make sure that we get rid of this constraint of skills and that we have a brighter future in the sector. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone who's in the room, and thanks to the organizers and all the partners who are in the room and all the experts. I'm already reading comments on the sides, the chat box, the experts that are in the room. So my name, as introduced, is Mpho Mookapele, the CEO of Energy and Water SETA. And in a nutshell, what we do is our job is to determine skills that are demanded for the energy and the water sector and ensure that we are facilitating the supply for such demand, a very simplistic form. Our role is not to fund stipends. Our role is not to fund learnership, which is, I think, a lot of the SETAs are defined as such, and that's not who you are. And this is why we've seen this as a strategic partnership, so that we get out and talk to the experts who are in the space. So we can look at how do we really build capacity for South Africa to be able to drive energy security in our country. All the problems have been shifted to me, so and maybe as we discuss, and I'm glad from a wind and renewable energy perspective, we've been having conversations around with hydrogen. The reality on the conversation around skills and capabilities of our country is a reality and is a real challenge. And one of the biggest challenge that I'll touch on really for me is the ability for everyone who's in the room to get together and determine what does South Africa require from a skills perspective. We run it we do it from a legislative point of view, where we go around different companies and every year we collate work skills plan. And I'm going to mention this because everyone who's in the room has contributed to that. And we get skewed information with regards to what the country require. And that goes to government, that allocates funding, and it does not assist in ensuring that we've got the right skills that are quality and that are at the right time. Our role is to ensure that we are determining demand in the generation of energy from a transmission and distribution, construction of pylons, and also marketing of electricity. And I assure you right now, I'm sitting with about 300 documents that are coming from South African energy companies, and none of them have identified energy efficiency as a skill, any skill related to energy efficiency. None of them have identified marketing of electricity. None of them have identified from a construction of pylon. I know that there's limited players, but I think the biggest challenge is our ability as the sector, as industry, to really come together and determine the right demand and when that demand is going to be required. And I know there's a lot of government policies that lies behind there. There's a lot of government decisions that lies behind there. But that's my biggest challenge, is that demand, accurate demand determination. Mr. Facilitator, you are very muted.
I'm sorry. Am I unmuted now? Okay, no, thanks. Thanks a lot. And I can see that people have started putting questions into the Q&A box. At some point or the other, try and pick up on some of those questions. I know some of the my colleagues also online can see them. But we some of those. But for now, maybe we can. I mean, the issue of skills, we can skills. Mpho, you kind of like have hinted to this, to the fact that it's important to work with others in resolving the skills challenge. I mean, you spoke to that when you said that you can only be able to compile a proper understanding of what is required if at all you work with everybody around the table. Maybe you could talk to this audience as to, you know, how do people reach you, and what are some of the strategic partnerships that you've put in place to work with industry on resolving the skills challenge in the renewable sector?
Thank you, sir. I think one of the key things that we've looked at as EWC, so you will note that in the country, just energy transition has been is a conversation everywhere. And we've got so many players who are doing research. Different types of research is being conducted within the country. We've got so many local and international investors that are flooding into Mpumalanga to look at what is it that we can do from a jet perspective. We've got the Presidential Climate Commission that has plans. You've got DMRE that has plans. You've got the sector, the wind sector, the wind industry, and the PV space that has plans. And I think one thing that we've done is to look at how do we strategically partner with the relevant players in the space. For instance, partnerships with Subvia and Sawia has been critical to us in clarifying some of the demand from the sector where they are got direct link to the industry players, instead of EWC going individually to some of the companies to try to determine demand. One of the key things, I think, from a collaboration point of view is important, and coordination point of view. We have proposed a JET collaboration platform. Just an example, I'm actually sitting at the GIZ offices to look at how do we work with other entities within the country, and how do we work with other funders within the country to have a clear picture of the skills that are required. I think one of the outcomes of the work we've done with Sania and with Real is this energy skills roadmap that was published recently, which has consolidated a number of researchers, actually a lot of researches that have been conducted in South Africa just on skills, just to look at what is it exactly that we require to ensure that we're driving for energy security. So that's most of the partnerships that we are having, I think, on an individual basis is really at research level, at for demand determination. And beyond that, we also look at how do we work with employers who are in the room to upskill either their employees, and also to ensure that we are driving access for some of those people who are outside the renewable energy space, which is where we now start looking at the unemployed people. One of the biggest burden that we have is the more than 400 unemployed, qualified young people in our country who aren't able to get jobs, and yet we've got a blooming renewable energy sector, so much activity. And what we look at is how do we work with the employers to ensure that some of these young people are included so they can meaningfully participate in those economies. And so those are just some of the things that we've been doing from a strategic partnership perspective. We co-fund projects. We've co-funded with some of our international partners and local partners that are in the room here.
Thanks a lot, Mpho. I'm not sure whether there's any other panel member who wants to. Was contributions sparked up an idea or a follow-up that you want to make? Santosh, I don't know, I saw you. Okay, no.
Thank you, Tumelo. So just to add to what Mpho has said, I think it's been very fruitful, the partnership that we've had with EWC in terms of identifying the skills we need, looking at the different areas of the value chain, and what level of skills do we need for those areas, and which sort of skills need a pick-me-up, which ones need to be promoted. What we've seen is that there's no, I think this is probably one of the biggest challenges, is that there's no clear pathway into the industry. When you consider a lot of other industries, there's a clear outline of what you need to study, where you need to train, and what the output will be, what certification, what accreditation would you have at the end of the day. And that's something that's a little bit lacking, I think, in the renewable energy sector. And we want to work towards clarifying that. So I think those skills roadmaps, a job map of what's contained in the renewable energy industry, and the road to get there needs to be clarified. So we know that if we're trying to attract not only engineers in the sector, but we need HR people, we need marketing people, we need people in accountants, lawyers, legal experts, policy experts. So it's not just that we're looking for technicians and we're looking for engineers. Of course, that's a big part of it, but it's not the only one. And we need to clarify that to make it more more admirable, more desirable for people who are currently studying, but in other industries as well, to transfer over to the renewable energy industry. And I think we've seen an uptake of that happening recently with the market boom. But also we need to look at how do we take it to a grassroots level. When you look at the knowledge of just what renewable energy is at a base level, going to the rural areas, going to schools, people are not really aware of what renewable energy is. It's a little bit of a foreign concept. PV now, I think, is becoming more mainstream because you can see it on top of someone's house. Wind energy is obviously a little bit more abstract because it's mostly implemented at utility scale. So one of the things that we are trying to solve through our activities like Energy Drive is taking the information to the people who need it and would benefit most by it. So the people in these rural communities where some may not even be connected to the grid as yet. South Africa is not fully electrified. You know, the introduction of renewable energy and microgrids could help solve that issue. So it's just one of the things that we're trying to look at is how to get the word out, increase the education levels amongst people that are not typically in the industry. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Santosh. I'd like to pivot a little bit. I mean, when we started, Rethabile, you spoke about grid access and grid capacity challenges with grid access and grid capacity. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more on that? And I can see that, I mean, looking at the Q&A, those problems, also asking James as to whether, you know, in terms of electricity trading, is grid access and access to capacity of the grid not going to be a challenge in establishing a viable trading model? And also maybe, James, when you come in, you can talk about also, people are asking whether traders are just, you know, other than just putting a margin on a product that has been created by somebody else, what's really the value of trading? But can we start, maybe look at the question in the context of capacity? Can we start with you, Rethabile?
Yes, Ntate, maybe let me sneak in a response on the skills conversation. From a solar PV perspective, we have identified electricians or as a trade as core to some of the skills and the expertise and competence that is required across the market segments, but particularly in the residential market. And that's why we developed a program called PV Green Card. It's not a qualification by any means. However, it is aimed at upskilling those that already have the basic skills. That's why I specifically talk about electricians, to be able to operate both in the AC and the DC side of the installations, which are typically hybrid, which are typically the solar PV, as well as battery storage, which is another sector that we have seen significant growth in. So I think our interest, as Mpho has indicated, is to ensure that those young people with some N4, N5 qualification do get access to opportunities that enable them to operate, and in turn, make sure that the much needed skills that the sector needs are fast-tracked. So I thought I should just sneak in that point. On the issue of grid access, we have already pointed out that it is a huge challenge for the sector. And in particular, it's a challenge in high resource areas of the Northern Cape and the Western Cape and some parts of the Eastern Cape. And that's why we saw the results, the non-ideal results of bid window 6, which excluded a lot of or all the viable wind projects. However, South Africa is a has the best resources, some of the best resources in the world. And what we consider low resource areas of Mpumalanga and maybe Free State and Mpho are relatively high in resource. And therefore, our position as industry associations, both SAPI and SAWIA, is for us to support development of projects in that area. That is why we work closely with industry partners, in particular Eskom, to help guide their grid planning. The survey that we just completed and published a couple of weeks ago points to that exact fact. For Eskom to plan properly, they need to have a sense of where the appetite is. And for those that have gone through the presentation from the survey, you'd see that the appetite is across the country. So whilst there are resource capacity constraint or grid capacity constraints in those areas that I mentioned, there is availability of grid in Mpumalanga. Equally, there's interest in developing projects in that area. So to echo Santosh's point, the future is not that bleak. We need to ensure that as industry, we work with the relevant partners to ensure that the development of projects in these less resourced areas is supported and developed. And yeah, I think my really the point that I want to drive is that let's not be fixated in those areas. Let's sort grid capacity challenges by introducing some interventions. I think curtailment has been mentioned, and storage. That's why we are glad that IPPO, the IPP office, has initiated storage bid windows, with the one that should close and the second one that will be issued this year, to address those capacity constraints in the short term. But in the long term, we understand that grid capacity and grid infrastructure needs to be developed in those areas. Let's not stop there. Let's make sure that we utilize the capacity that is available in other provinces, which have not equally good resources, but still fantastic resources compared to other areas across the continent and of course the world. So yeah, moderator, that's where I'd like to stop for now, and like to get the input or hear the input from my fellow panelists.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rethabile. James, yeah, maybe to you. I mean, there are quite a number of questions on grid capacity and trading in the chat. Would grid capacity would still not affect trading from municipalities? How are you going to address this? There's a question about why are we restricted from trading within South Africa? Are there any restrictions, in fact, on trading other than the fact that you do not have the available templates? Yeah, and in general, your take on the issue of grid capacity. There's also a question on trading and different technologies such as hydrogen. I don't know, it's quite a lot of questions. I don't know whether you'd be able to make, yeah, within the context of talking about capacity.
That's totally understood. Thank you very much, Mr. Facilitator. I think Dr. Melamu touched on some very important points in the last discussion, to say that South Africa really we're very fortunate as a nation. We have the renewable resource in the country is like gold. I think it's important to reiterate that point, that yes, the optimal locations in the country are pretty saturated. The grids and the networks and the capacity is saturated. But to Dr. Melamu's point, lots of parts of our country actually have, if you look on a global basis, incredible renewable resource and do have capacity. So, it's important to bear that in mind. We're very blessed. People often think of kind of offshore oil finds and other types of, exciting deposits. Renewable resource is actually an asset, and it's an asset that this country has large, and needs to monetize. I think in terms of within the context of our business model, of course, grid capacity constraints affects the marketplace, generally speaking. It's important to note, though, that as a trader, we're not a project developer, so we approach projects and, developments or IPPs that are what we call PPA ready projects. Within this market, obviously, they've got their BQ issued, they've secured their grid capacity with Eskom. They've been through that journey. We're a buyer. So ultimately, we're going to the universe of projects that does have grid capacity confirmed, that is PPA ready for us to offtake power from. It obviously, there is still the general issue of, if you have a much larger pool of projects that has grid capacity, that's obviously better for us. We'll have more options. There's more competition. It's a better thing for South Africa. Of course, we all are working towards that goal. I think dovetailing back to the original point, we think that even though the best parts of our country are quite saturated, two sub-points to that. The second best areas are still globally fantastic. So there's a lot of renewable energy there to monetize. That's fantastic. The other point is to say that at the moment, as the participants and panelists will know, it's been quite a difficult process for BQ applications in South Africa. You've actually got quite a lot of projects that are sitting with BQs that aren't moving forward. And so we understand that Eskom's going through a renewed drive to actually, force reapplications of a lot of these projects. Because what's the biggest nightmare is you've got IPPs that have BQs that aren't starting their construction yet, and it's blocking, for example, like the last REAP round where the wind projects can't make it forward. So there is a whole a host of, we understand, capacity that's actually unused. So it's a bit of an inefficiency in the system that needs to be addressed and is being addressed as we speak. I think that's important to also note. So in the first instance, great renewable resources overall, and then even inefficiencies to free up some more. In terms of trading as a business model, I think you were asking earlier, what is the value proposition? We get asked this question quite a lot. I think in the big bang has just happened. The market is only at its infancy in terms of trading in South Africa. So what is the short-term value proposition? Really is, I would say, predominantly around this concept of aggregation. So the first part of the trading world, or let's say the phase of it, is aggregation. Now, aggregation comes with benefits on both sides of a transaction. Aggregation is, we're moving from let's call it a bilateral, so an IPP selling power directly to Eskom or to one buyer, into a world where there'll be a many-to-many transaction, right? So we will be sourcing power from various IPPs and we'll be selling that power to various customers. The benefits to the customers is that, for example, most large corporates or even customers downstream in South Africa want a blend of renewable energy. They have net zero targets by 2030. There's also this carbon border adjustment tax threat that's looming. Europe's just passed the legislation, as you're all aware. So with a traded model, you're able to sell a blend of energy. So, mixing together solar, wind, geothermal, etc., to create a much fuller renewable profile for customers. So that's very important, is that selling this blend. It also creates other benefits such as redundancy. So if a particular power plant's not able to perform, or there's some form of grid event, you've actually got this aggregation concept providing backup to a customer for green power. It actually talks to the hydrogen question too. Hydrogen electrolyzers are required to be supplied by green energy at all times. Now, with a traded solution, you're able to provide that kind of support or support a system like that. On the other side of the trade, on the generation side, aggregation is very useful too, because in the existing world, it's a one-to-one basis, right? So if we think of one mine buying 100 megawatts of power from a generator, if a risk scenario plays out and the mine can't perform, the generator is not going to get paid, and it's very difficult for them. If we're suddenly selling to, in that example, 5 times 20 megawatt buyers, or even more than that, you've got a lot of risk reduction in that system, where for the generators, for the lenders, and for the investors at large. So we think that those benefits, and that's just the start, obviously, of this market. Moving into the next phases, you'll have the typical other value propositions, such as hedging services, where producers and consumers can hedge via traders. Balancing services, where where we will be able to absorb excess power or sink power into the marketplace when we move to a future market. Obviously, that's down the track, but we think that's where we'll eventually go to, like the rest of many markets globally. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, James. And I think you've addressed the issue of, I mean, a little bit about your contribution of trading to risk reduction for market participants, both on the supply side and also on the demand side. Change tech also now a little bit. One of the questions so maybe to declare conflict of interest, I used to work with the department. I used to work for the Department of Trade and Industry. I spent 15 years at the DTI. So I'm quite passionate about manufacturing, about manufactured exports, about localization, because we see manufacturing as, you know, key for transforming the economy and creating jobs. And maybe starting with yourself, Santosh, and I guess all the panelists can really have a go at this one. Yeah, a lot of the technology I assume we have to import because it is developed not necessarily in South Africa. I hope that we are making our contribution, or we are catching up and making, you know, technical and knowledge contributions to the field. But for, you know, development of the upstream part of where we manufacture components and where we, you know, do R&D, and we are not just technology. Maybe we can talk to Santosh and Dr. Melamu, and then maybe we up to all the other panelists. Yeah, what are the prospects and what is happening in that area?
Thank you, facilitator. So I think let's start with the first item, that in order to develop any value chains, you need some sort of certainty in order to enable investment. And I think one of the first things is we touched, I think James touched on this briefly, was the grid capacity allocation rules, or the queuing rules from Eskom for the allocation of the grid that is remaining and has been allocated already. So that was launched, initially released by Eskom in February of this year, but we've not really heard anything yet after that. So we're not sure at what stage of finalization that is. So I think a lot of the market is waiting for that to come out because the rest of the BQ applications have been put on hold. So I think that's number one. Number two, I think we need to look at policy certainty at a bit of a higher level as well. The IRP dictates what our energy requirements are going to be, usually over a 10-year period. And although we did have a stipulation for 1,600 megawatts per year, and we saw that is what the renewable energy industry largely owes its growth to, was the IRP and the REAP rounds. And we saw massive uptake in the beginning of the 2010s up till about 2015, and it died down. And I think a lot of, and Dr. Melamu will be able to speak about this as well, is that a lot of OEMs invested in creating plants in South Africa because of that rapid uptake. But unfortunately, that gap in the market between 4 and 5, that created a lot of instability, created uncertainty, and a lot of large producers then pulled out of the country, either had to scale down operations or pulled out entirely. And I think in order to avoid seeing that in the future, we needed to diversify, which we've seen now, that with the introduction of the private market as well, there's no longer the single buyer, single seller. So there's a lot more opportunity for cross-selling, for different players in the market to enter. Regarding the actual content that the industries have achieved over the years, I think it's important to note that the REAP program had specific targets in place, and the wind industry has always met those targets on average, about 50% content from the previous bid, all the previous bid windows to now, which exceeds actually the 44% requirement average over that same time period. So I think the industry has always met that target. And now that we have this booming market now, we are waiting for the revised IRP, because that's going to determine our energy trajectory for the future, which we're expecting in the next few months, hopefully. And according to the announcement from the electricity minister of the 15,000 megawatts that's to be procured, that's even beside what we've seen in the grid survey, the interest in the grid survey. So that shows us that there is commitment from government to put this down in writing, to say, yes, we are going to have a stable and growing renewable energy industry going forward. And I think that's probably one of the most important things that we need in order to facilitate this investment into local production. One of the interesting things I think that's now happening is the IDC is busy with a study to examine the feasibility of establishing a local manufacturing facility for multi-OEM turbine blades. So that's currently in the process. But yeah, I think as long as there is certainty from government that there is going to be a certain amount of renewable energy procured every year, and as James mentioned as well about drawing up these templates for this new market. I mean, this is a bit of a new space. We need to look at the international examples, and we also need to decide what is best for us as South Africa. Yes, we need to move towards a just energy transition, but we're currently in an energy crisis. So what helps us get out of that crisis the quickest? We need energy that we can bring online in a quick fashion in the next 12 to 24 months. We need energy that is cost competitive, that is cheap, and also that contributes towards economic development of the country. I think those are the important things we need to consider. I'll hand it over to my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Okay, no, thanks. Yeah, you spoke about, I mean, policy certainty being important in making sure that, you know, investors can commit to localization. Dr. Melamu, as you maybe respond to the issue of localization directly, maybe in photovoltaics, maybe you can also just maybe touch on the issue of policy certainty. The Minister of Electricity has been talking about maybe it might be useful to look at refurbishing some of the old power stations that we are going to be taking out. Is that actually in contradiction to what we are trying to do in the renewable sector, or is that interfering with certainty? Maybe if you just do touch on that, you know, how the coexistence with the older sectors, with clarity in terms of government policy, and with, you know, what's going on at the current moment. Are the politicians actually creating calm and ease for people to be investing in
Thank you very much, moderator. I think we are on record as solar PV industry to advocate for a symphony of technologies. So we see each of the various resources that the country has playing a specific role. We do believe that there is a huge scope for renewables in our energy mix, and that's why we are advocating for government to support the uptake and the deployment of renewable energy technology. So there is enough space for us under the sun, and whilst we're developing the various technology and we are transitioning, we need to be mindful that we also have our climate commitments that we have with international organizations. So let's advocate for a symphony of technologies, but also understand that renewables have a significant role to play. So let me echo my colleague's sentiments around policy certainty, but not belabor the point. Second point that I would like to make is around incentives. Oftentimes, government talks about localization and for OEMs and industry to develop industries and not industry, but manufacturing facilities in South Africa. However, it is still not clear what kind of incentives would be placed on the table to enable industry to make those kinds of investments. If we consider China, for instance, as an example, not really as a competitor, there are incentives across the board. So if you are a PV manufacturer that operates in a town that is located in a region or a province You get your town incentives, then you get your regional incentives, then you get federal incentives, then you get shipping incentives. So for us as a country to meaningfully compete with the rest of the world, we need to be clear what we are placing on the table. Mindful that those incentives are not really meant to enable OEMs to invest. You are addressing other societal issues that we're grappling with as a country. We have a lot of young people that are not employed. You need to incentivize the establishment of these manufacturing facilities so that you can make sure that the young people that are qualified are employed, that you attract investment. So the issue of incentives is overlooked. And as an industry associations, I'm speaking on behalf of SAPVIA and SAWIA here, we have made that point very clear in the development of the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, that unless you are clear about what you are putting on the table, it will be very a difficult sell to make to international OEMs who have options to locate elsewhere in the world, unless you're very clear about what these incentives are. Maybe let me just move to a second point and give other panelists an opportunity. The second point I want to make, moderator, is around which parts of the value chain one needs to focus on for localization. Oftentimes when we talk about, let's say, I'll use solar PV as an example, there is unprecedented fixation on solar PV modules, right? But there is an entire balance of system where there are huge opportunities for South Africa to really exploit where they've already developed capabilities. That is why SAPVIA commissioned a study last year, and that study is available to members and partners that maps out localization opportunities along the solar PV value chain. One of the outcomes of that study or the recommendations is that let us identify low-hanging fruit. I'll use one as an example, cables. The demand for solar cables in this country are really mind-boggling. However, we still, by and large, importing those cables. Yet there are capabilities. There are companies that are members of SAPVIA, such as Alvin Cable, that are looking to scale up because of the demand, not just in South Africa, but in the rest of the continent. But because our idea of localization is around solar PV modules, and some of my government counterparts, and I say this with respect, having spent almost a decade working for government, we are looking at those big ticket items. Yet we can multiply, we can create multiple manufacturing facilities just here around the corner here in the east of Johannesburg or in the east of Gauteng. There are tremendous capabilities. And let us focus on low-hanging fruit. Let us incentivize them and make sure that we focus on areas where we have capabilities and we can expand and scale, and not just look internally for our local market, but look at how we can build capabilities and expertise to export to the rest of the continent and ultimately to the rest of the world. So those are the 2 points I have to say, but let me stop here, moderator. I think you are muted, sir. Yes.
Yeah. No, my task is not so much to talk as to listen and to pose questions. So it's quite appropriate that I'm on mute most of the time in this session. But I mean, quite an interesting discussion and response on incentives, and maybe I mean, you see quite a lot with countries that are making progress in this area, like China, that they have rolled out huge incentives for manufacturers in the industry. And the latest being the United States. I mean, the United States Inflation Reduction Act, it's big industry giveaways, right, for taking and bringing back manufacturing plants into the US to manufacture, particularly, renewables, either in power generation or in the automotive sector. But whenever you talk about manufacturing, you talk about R&D, again, skills, it's an issue that comes up. There's been the energy and water, the CETA has launched the first Africa Skills Program for hydrogen system practitioners, a technology that's quite at its infancy. Can you tell us, is this potentially a game changer in the renewable energy space? How is it going to work? And how could it potentially change our participation in the value chain, becoming not only, consumers in the sectors, in these energy sectors, but also producers of these technologies? Can you maybe just share that and whether also the model is replicable to other technologies? Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm going to also just touch on the manufacturing conversation that you've just had. I think the reality is, while we are discussing the world moves, while we are planning in South Africa, the world moves. While we have initiatives on how to determine what's what, the world is moving, and we're going to become consumers and uptakers of what they are developing. From a manufacturing, and I think this is what EWTA has done. We've partnered with China and Chinese companies and TVET colleges on looking at manufacturing certain components, like Dr. Rethabile is talking to. How do we bring that into TVET colleges? And I know our hearts really sit in the TVET colleges, because this is where a lot of communities that are excluded from economic participation sort of send their children, and maybe most of the young people find themselves. It's really to look at, let's identify areas, and I think other countries are really planning for us. We are welcoming the partnership from international players, but we also want to, so that we can benefit as a country. So we're looking at what are the components that the Chinese expertise can assist us in manufacturing locally, with their funding, of course, in our TVET colleges. The reality is that we are going to get I think it's not, I don't want to use the word embarrassing, but I will. Embarrassing, where we talk about the natural resources that we have from the sun and the wind, and yet every single technology that we require for such is imported. It shows some. It says a lot about us as South Africa. When we looked at the energy skills roadmap, some of the key skills that came at the top of the agenda that we are lacking in South Africa is local thinking. I know it's not technical. Our ability to think locally, our ability to think integrated planning. And this comes when we look at us focusing on generation for quite a long time and forgetting to start talking transmission and distribution. And we will probably start talking about it when it becomes a big problem, start talking about the skills when it becomes a big problem. So, same thing as manufacturing. We're not really talking about it. We talk localization. Our localization really becomes about meeting certain targets, but not really looking at a country as a whole. How do we drive economic growth through localization and identifying key areas in manufacturing that will, in the next 4 or 5 years, assist us in building, sort of improving economic growth? So there's policy conversations that we've had. Our lack of capabilities, and this is where EWTA comes in. We don't only look at technical skills. How do we capacitate policy makers and regulation setters on, I don't know what skill they require, whether it's local thinking, whether strategic thinking, or I don't know, economic development, to set policies that are going to build the country and not are going to create hindrances, and also ability to also understand your own regulation and implement your own regulation on time. We can't be talking about we've generated so much energy and there's inefficiencies in the space, in the sector, because there's no uptake or there's no grid. It's sort of, I think, a poor reflection on us as a country. But I think for me, there's a bigger challenge there, just that planning, strategic thinking, local thinking, transformational thinking, understanding that as the world is moving from green to greener, you are moving from brown to green, and therefore you totally require different planning and policies and plans in place. So there's a bigger challenge at planning level, at a higher level in our country. Manufacturing, again, we will sit, and when we finally make a decision, we start talking about manufacturing skills. But what we've done, we've looked at the hydrogen space. I think I always say in the next 10 years, if we talk about redressing past inequalities and equity issues in the hydrogen sector, we would have failed ourselves, because we have it right now. What we were noticing in the hydrogen space is that a lot of people were getting qualifications, not a qualification, when from a fuel cell technician, technical skills, people were using Singapore qualifications or Singapore courses, and what that does, it excludes a lot of South Africans from participating. So what EWCTA did is that we look at those international learnings, and we localized the qualification so that we can drive access, and access not only to those who have access to Singapore funding, but access to everyone within the country. And it's a beginning point. It's really a starting point. And I think there's a lot within the hydrogen value chain that we need to ensure that we are not left behind as South Africa. The amount of interest that is coming to our shores because of our renewable energy, I'm going to say commodities, should say to us there's something that we can lead as a country and not just be a host country. We can't be a host country where there's investors are coming in, plant their, whether it's energy farms, and then leave with green hydrogen. And all we become as a host country, there must be something. And I know there's intelligence in our country, there's money in our country to build from there. So it's skills. And I know often we mistaken, like I said, to low-level skills. We really need the capabilities to think for our country and plan, not only plan, I think we plan well, and implement some of the great plans that we have. Just one point, I'm sitting in the BRICS group where we're looking at renewable energy plan skills demand for the BRICS community. And you should see how many, I think it was India and China were very much interested in the report that we presented. What they're going to do is they're going to implement it because they're working together with industry. In our country, from a capacity building perspective, industry is very separate from what government is doing when it comes to capacity building.
I think we need to start rounding up now. We've dealt with some of the questions that are in the panel, that are in the Q&A box, but I see there are new questions that have come in. What I'd like us to do is to start giving each panelist an opportunity to have their concluding remarks. And talking about some of the issues that have come up here, maybe where you didn't feel like you didn't get an opportunity to voice some thoughts that you had, last thoughts that you have on the topics that we've handled today. But I would like you to also look at some of, we've had open questions. There's a question about whether there's a consolidated product and system level localization strategy across renewable to extend localization. So maybe as you put your concluding thoughts, have a look, see if at all you can maybe respond to that. Do you think that the IRP update will take into account current grid capacity? I guess it's a question of confidence in the planning of government. To look at the COP26 billions that have been promised, I guess that's the jet funding. Can it be useful for grid expansion? I think those are the last three questions. A number of the questions I think we have dealt with. Maybe we'll start this last round of final comments. Start with you, James. Maybe, I don't know, you didn't get a chance to talk about manufacturing, whether you have some thoughts that you wanted to say, and maybe also looking at the questions, if at all there are any of the questions ring the bell or you want to attempt. But can you please go ahead maybe and share your final thoughts? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Facilitator. I think you talked around where we weren't able to come in. I think one point I really wanted to make around jobs, the jobs topic, and was that I think that what's really important is in the municipalities at the moment in South Africa, you've obviously got quite a strong incentive for customers downstream, to take the situation into their own hands and build their own, on-site assets or put on rooftop solar to mitigate against load shedding or to control their affairs more. And the issue that creates on the other side is that customers leave the grid. So there's off-grid flight is what we call it. And in many municipalities, the municipalities collect something like more than 50% of their revenues from power-related services. So this is a big problem if not addressed properly. What we believe, again, with the wheeling and trading solution is that you're able to create the right incentives for customers to want to stay on the network because they're receiving, cleaner, more affordable power on the grid itself and don't need to kind of, resolve that separately. So it ensures that, the grids are secured, that jobs are kept in place, that jobs won't be lost because the networks are still supplying. So I think on the jobs topic, that's very important. I believe that concept of mitigating off-grid flight. I think that also in terms of the manufacturing sector, of course, a lot of the manufacturing assets in the country and big corporates that own those are exposed to renewable targets, net zero by 2030 or carbon border adjustment tax points we've discussed earlier, exporting manufactured goods to the European Union. You've suddenly got exposures. And I think that, that is something that needs to be considered within this forum, is that we need to decarbonize our networks to ensure that those manufacturing industries are incentivized to remain in South Africa and not want to relocate their businesses abroad. Obviously that ensures that jobs are preserved and that South African economy is kept healthy. I just think that's very important for as a concept. And then my final comment, I think on the topic of hydrogen, I think it's extremely exciting. I think hydrogen is just an incredible technology that is just starting to really become, quite well understood. And in this region is so much resource to harvest. Namibia next door, South Africa, you saw the headline yesterday around $1 billion US contract with the Dutch president or prime minister. And I think, again, fantastic new industry to try and grow in our country, create jobs, and etc. Final thing to just say, I think that we've obviously got an issue. You talked about the Just Energy Transition Funds, the $8.5 billion US. Clearly, one of the issues there's been some strings attached, and there's also been a lot of worries for job losses, and respectfully in our coal-fired power plants and the community around coal. I think those are relevant problems. I think that we need to think around how those jobs could be preserved, or there's a negotiation around a transition. I personally believe that gas to power is an important transition fuel. Maybe some of those jobs can be repurposed for that baseload alternative transition technology. But with that, and if we can get that right, hopefully the $8.5 billion can absolutely be used to expand our grid and strengthen our networks. So I think I just wanted to make those final comments. Thank you very much to the panelists and to you. I'll hand back to you, Mr. Facilitator.
Thanks a lot, James. Quite a mouthful. Maybe Melamu, we can move to you. Maybe your concluding thoughts on this webinar and some of the questions that have come up.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, before you jump in, there's quite a bit on storage, but I think you did touch on that earlier on. But there's a question on the role of storage in smoothing fluctuations. You can touch on that. I mean, it's a question that has come in now. But please, your concluding thoughts on some of the questions that open questions that are in there. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Maybe let me start with the question on planning and manufacturing. There is an initiative of the DTIC and DMRE together with industry and other partners that aims to put together a comprehensive plan. I may have alluded to it earlier, the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, typically abbreviated at SAREM. It's at advanced stages of development, and I think the core team should be finalizing the draft, and it will be out for public comment, suspect sometime in July. So just an opportunity for key players, people on this call to make inputs into that master plan before it is concluded. On the issue of storage, Mr. Moderator, maybe let me respond to that by indicating that at residential and commercial and industrial spaces or market segments, we have seen installations of hybrid systems, so a combination of solar PV and batteries. And the demand for all these components has just skyrocketed in the past year or so. Maybe let me just quote the statistic just to drive a point home, that in the last quarter of 2022, we saw 1.8 billion worth of imports, various components. And I think this is only for modules. The numbers for other components such as inverters as well as batteries is mind-boggling, as I indicate. In the first quarter of 2023 alone, we have seen 3.6 billion worth of modules imported, probably mainly from China. And so that's the extent of the demand for the various components. So my part ensures that renewable energy technologies and sector has a critical role to play in ensuring that we are energy secure as a country. However, I should underscore that it's not a panacea for all our societal problems. It's not going to solve all our challenges that we have. Issues that the CEO of EWC alluded to around strategic planning and implementation will remain key for us to realize that ideal goal that we have as a country, that becoming a prosperous state. The second point is that whilst a renewable energy sector is not a panacea, we would have done it would be an act of injustice to future generation if this generation does not exploit opportunities that reside in the renewable energy sector to deal with our fundamental socio-economic challenges, that of addressing issues of unemployment and inequality. We're importing quite a lot. The sectors, the renewable energy sectors are growing. For instance, the solar PV sector became a gigawatt sector in 2022. We installed 1 gigawatt of capacity, of solar PV capacity. That was just in residential and commercial and industrial sector. If you include wind there, you can imagine how much capacity we have installed. We're going to double or maybe even triple in 2023. We cannot triple and reach everybody else, but leave out the majority of South Africa to address issue around equity. Ultimately, this sector should move a needle towards getting the majority of our people out of poverty. So unless we think about that from the socio-economic development perspective and the opportunity that it presents to us, over and above energy security intervention, I think we would have missed out on a huge opportunity. James talked about this being gold. I think Mpho also talked about it. Immense opportunity, as Santosh has really alluded to. We cannot be a generation that is are seen to have slept on the job. So it's a call not just for us as panelists, it's a call for those of us on the call, but it's also a call for us to realize that individually in our organization, there's only so much impact we can make, but we need to pool our resources. Yes, we always talk about partnership, but can we have meaningful partnership that make meaningful contribution to where it matters? Let me stop here, moderator, and thank you for the opportunity to Creamer Media once more, and a really great conversation with fellow panelists and great facilitations, Mr. Facilitator. Thank you.
I was saying thank you. That was really quite a powerful closing. And yeah. No, it really touched me. Maybe move to you, Santosh. And I mean, I think you touched something that keeps coming up on the inclusivity of the renewable sector. I can see even as we are talking, somebody has posted something in the group to say, you know, it's only people who have money, it's only white people who are in this sector. And you know, it's kind of belied by the composition of this panel. It's belied by everything that has been said. But the impression and is quite powerful out there. And I guess we've been able to address some of it. And I guess if it is there, that in reality, it's for some reason, some people are experiencing it like that, and there must be a good reason why they experience like that. So I don't know as we move to you, Santosh, and you make maybe your closing remarks and yourself, Mpho. Maybe you could touch on that issue as to, I know Rethabile has spoken to it a lot, and James also has spoken about job creation a lot, but yeah, it'd be useful to touch on that issue again. Santosh, maybe over to you. Your closing remarks.
Thank you,
and maybe, yeah.
So yes, it is. Thank you, Facilitator. So yes, we know it is a problem. There's a problem of representation and diversity in the sector, both via race and via gender. One of the things that we conducted last year in partnership with SAFIA was the gender diversity baseline study, which is complete, but we need to launch it. There was some very obvious results in that study, but also some underlying issues that were brought up in that. Yes, we know that we're very, very far from parity in terms of representation of women in the sector as a whole, but also at senior level. And although we're seeing those levels increasing over time, it's still not enough. And what do we need to do to increase that? So it's something I mentioned previously. I think it's baseline education that matters here. If we're going to bring new people into the sector, we need to inform people about what the industry is, what opportunities it has for them, and what benefits they can reap from it. And that's something that a lot of our members are also actively trying to do in the communities in which they currently operate, but we're trying to do it a bit more on a national level to try and get a strategy to get the information out there. So we know that diversity really is an issue, and it's something that we're trying to fill the gap with. We instituted also, as part of the Gender Diversity Working Group, the Management Development Program for Women in Renewable Energy this year to accelerate the careers of women in middle management to become senior managers, to become exco level. So that program is actually currently underway, and we're going to open the intake for next year's cohort very soon. I think when you look at something Mpho spoke about, that you know, with this rapidly growing industry, we need the skills to be able to support that industry. And it's not just the plants itself, it's everything that supports the plants. So if you are going to build 66 gigawatts of renewable energy over the next 5 years, where's that energy going to? It needs to be transmitted. You need the skills to be able to put up those transmission lines. And although there is a plan in place, Eskom has their transmission development plan. In order to increase our penetration of renewable energy, we need to accelerate that plan. And they need funding for that, but they also need the skills. And where is those skills coming from? Can we upskill people in other sectors to be able to do that? And then pivoting a little bit, when you look at the other opportunities that are available now, some of my other panelists spoke on green hydrogen as well. I think that's a massive opportunity for South Africa to establish itself as the base of green hydrogen in Africa, if not in the world, considering our renewable energy resources, both on land and even offshore. There's a few projects that may be looking at the feasibility of that shortly. So I think we need to exploit that as far as we can. And something another panelist mentioned was that we should not be left behind. I believe Mpho mentioned that while we are making plans, the rest of the world is moving. And we know this, and we need to be proactive. Making plans only is not good enough. They needs to be accompanied with implementation. And if we're looking at ensuring that South African businesses remain competitive in the export market, if we look at one of South Africa's largest, well, it is South Africa's largest trading partner is the EU, and they are going to be implementing this carbon border adjustment mechanism. How do we ensure that South African businesses remain competitive in that market with some of those locally produced products there? We know we need to clean up our carbon footprint. And a lot of businesses are now investing in renewable energy, not just for energy security or backup or for reducing load peaks, but also to clean up their carbon footprint so that they become more competitive overseas. So I think that's something that's very important to look at, and it's going to have a massive impact, maybe not this year, but we're going to see it in the long term. I think one of the last things we need is there's a lot of plans being developed by different departments, and both Savia and Sapphire is on the project committee for the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, representing industry. I think that needs to tie with some of the other plans that are coming out, the Just Energy Transition Plan, with the IRP, with the Green Hydrogen Master Plan, with the Steel Master Plan. Then there needs to be an alignment between all of these plans so that we are all speaking from the same hymn sheet, so that we are not duplicating efforts. If we are going to develop skills in one sector, can that effort also be used? If it's for green hydrogen, can it also be used for wind? Can it also be used for solar? Can it also be used for steel? So we need to look at where we can maximize our efficiency with these plans and not duplicate efforts. So I think that's probably my main point now. It's that let's all align, let's all make sure that we're moving forward together and that we're not duplicating efforts, so we can accelerate this transition and so that we can hopefully stop load shedding. So thank you.
No, thanks a lot, Santosh. And I guess your last comment, I mean, ties with my experience of government, and you know how people within different sectors within government tend to plan in silos. You have the Department of Energy in its own silo, the National Treasury in its silo, Minerals and Energy in its silo, and hence we get. And maybe it answers one of the questions that we had before as to, no, what's that skill that we lack at high level planning for the country? And I think maybe part of that is coordination, high level coordination, you know, yeah. But anyway, it's you are going to be having as the authority the last word in this panel. Can maybe, and we're running out of time. We'd like to finish by 15:30. If you could just maybe give us your concluding thoughts. Yeah.
Thank you very much. 2 minutes. I think there's questions on QC2O and e-waste. I think very critical. I just wanted to really touch on the critical point on e-waste, that it's not all waste in the space. It's not something that we've forgotten. Please do connect with us. We do have some SMEs who are working and entrepreneurs who are working around the space also to drive that inclusion also part that we've discussed. QC2O from an accreditation perspective and certification of individuals, we still do, EWC still gets involved. I think only the processes have changed where your application goes through QC2O, but ultimately we do the work. Just closing, there's a comment that was made, which I really would like to borrow as a closing, where it talks to inclusion. It says, can we, Harold made the comment, that can we not, hopefully the huge potential of this industry won't be hijacked by a selfish few without addressing the sad state of our unemployment. And I think just beyond the few playing in the space, I sit in a lot of hydrogen discussion and renewable energy discussion, and the rooms don't look South African. And I think we need to fix just how that looks to drive inclusion. EWCTA, we're driving inclusive economic participation, especially in these two areas where we're looking at how do we bring in those who don't even know about the energy sector. And this is where employers are key. We can't skill anyone without industry. We can put them into colleges, we are qualifying them, but we are not skilling them. And we can only skill when we've got employers that are participating. When you look at the German models, it's successful because industry is driving skilling. You get skilled on the job. In South Africa, yes, we are not so industrialized, but we're really pleading and asking those who are in the room as employers, let's skill our people, and we can even skill more of them and export them to Namibia, export them to the rest of Africa. That is going to contribute to the socioeconomic challenges that we are seeing in our country. So from a closing perspective, my really desire is to see our industry driving capacitating South Africa. And not TVET colleges and only universities. That is not skilling. It's qualifying people. We give them qualifications and they don't have the relevant skill. So I'd really like to employ our employers who are in the room. From SMME perspective, we're also driving that inclusion in the value chains within the renewable energy and sector. It also requires industry participation. We do have partners with CSIRs and innovation hubs, but it's not adequate. So I thank you very much for the discussion. I think if I was to say anything, employers, industry is the one that's going to skill the country, not universities alone and not TVET colleges alone.
Thanks a lot for an appropriate place to end it with asking for industry to come and play its role in skilling the country. Colleagues, thanks a lot for tolerating me for this 1.5 hours. I've learned quite a lot listening to you. I've also learned quite a lot looking at the Q&A box and looking at the questions. Unfortunately, this brings us now to the end of our session, and I need to say thanks to you, thanks to Prima Media, and hand over to Shannon. Shannon, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Tumelo. That brings us to the end of the webinar. I'd like to thank our facilitator, Tumelo Chipfupa, for enabling a robust and engaging discussion. Thank you also to our panelists, Dr. Rethabile Melamu from the South African Photovoltaic Industry Association, James Beatty from Enpower Trading, Mpho Mookapele from the Energy and Water Sector Education and Training Authority, and Santosh Sookgrim from the South African Wind Energy Association. Thank you to our sponsors, the Energy and Water Sector Education and Training Authority, Enpower Trading, Balancel, BTE Renewables, Energy Innovation Holdings, Engie, and Kluber Lubrication for their support in making this webinar possible. And finally, thank you to the attendees for taking the time to join us for this discussion on the role of renewable energy in assisting South Africa to overcome load shedding. Our next webinar takes place on the 26th of July at 2 p.m. and will focus on the automotive industry. So if you'd like to join that one, the link to register for that event has been shared in the chat. The recording of today's webinar will be sent to you in due course. And if you have any additional questions, please be in touch. You can reach us at shannon@creamermedia.co.za. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. Stay warm and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.